Okay, it is 9:02 by my clock, and I think I'll get things started. First, I'm going to throw a poll up if folks don't mind answering a question. It'll just kind of help me get a feel for people's familiarity with our data tools. So hopefully you can see the poll pop up in the team screen. Looks like it's working. Great. If you hit done once you fill out the questions, you can get it out of your screen. All right, thanks for responding. Looks like there's pretty good familiarity with some of the tools, which is good, but hopefully I will provide some information to brush up or introduce some new ones. With that, we'll get started. So first of all, thank you so much for joining here today. For this leveraging labor market information session. I'm going to cover some of the tools that are most useful, at least from my perspective, for those working in economic development and grant writing. That is to say that there's a lot of other tools that could be useful to folks, but we're going to focus on a few to try and get the biggest bang for our buck here in this hour and a half. So I am going to try and pack in a bunch of information here in an hour and a half. I'll say right up front that please ask questions, throw them in the chat. I am the moderator and host, so if I miss a question, I will get to it when we pause. I have a built-in break in the session, so I'll try and answer questions then. And I plan on sticking around afterwards for a half an hour or so for anyone that has any more in-depth questions, or if you don't feel comfortable asking it during the session, I'm happy to answer them then. And if there are any questions that I can't get to over all of that, I will be sending out an email with all of the details and resources that we covered today. And that'll include answers to any questions that I couldn't get to or couldn't answer during the session. So rest assured that I will address your question in some form throughout or afterward. So with that, let's dive right in. Oh, and I will ask, please mute your microphones if you haven't already. We got a few people on here, and it'll just help minimize background noise. And I think you were notified, but this is recorded, so just a heads up. It'll be sent out to folks that registered, so they can have a recording of this session. Okay, DEED. What is DEED? We'll just start out with that. DEED is the Department of Employment and Economic Development. So it's a statewide agency that helps manage economic development, workforce development. We manage unemployment insurance. We encourage businesses to locate, expand, grow in Minnesota, but we also help workers move from job to job, field to field, build their skills. We do everything that helps encourage Minnesota's economy to grow. So we cover a pretty broad array of services. And I talked a little bit about what we're going to do today, and perhaps I'll back up and introduce myself. My name is Carson Gorecki, and I'm the Northeast Minnesota Regional Analyst. There are 6 of us throughout the state, 4 different planning regions. I'm able to present this virtually to everybody throughout the state, so my Northeast region isn't super relevant to this presentation, but if you have any desire or needs for information specific to Northeast Minnesota, I'm your guy. And today we are going to talk about some labor market information. That's what LMI stands for. I'm going to talk about some of those basic LMI concepts. We're going to do a brief labor market update using some of the data sources that we're going to talk about as examples. And then we're going to walk through tools. I've got an ambitious list here. There's probably about 5 that I hope to really get to. And if we have time, I'll squeeze in some more. And yeah, it's going to be jam-packed. And again, if we don't get all the nitty-gritty details, I'm going to share a whole bunch of resources. And I myself am a resource. So if you ever have any questions on any of these tools or other tools, feel free to reach out at any time. With Indeed, there's a labor market information office in which I work, and each state produces a whole array of different data and information relevant to the economy, but specifically the labor market, which I kind of describe as the way that people interface with the economy. So we're talking about unemployment, jobs, wages, career pathways, educational attainment. This isn't so much your, gross domestic product or those larger economic measures. This is a more human element of the economy, is the way I like to describe it. But we have tons of different information that a ton of different folks and organizations throughout the state can use, and it's free and open to everybody in Minnesota. What are some examples of the data that we provide? You can break them out by survey-based and census-based. Basically, that's to say that some are sampling from a larger population and doing estimations based off of that. And then some are taken from all of the paperwork that are submitted for example, in the unemployment insurance program, if businesses have to submit quarterly, saying how many workers they have, what industry they're in, how much they're paying them, et cetera. And that provides really good information to the labor market information office in each state. So we have data that are census, which is everybody, right? And we have a decennial census every 10 years, and that's meant to count everybody in the US. But you can do censuses of smaller populations as well, including number of the jobs in Minnesota. What do we do with all these data? We create new data tools, combining different sources to try and get more value out of them, add value. We do a lot of research and writing. I publish, and all the other regional analysts do monthly blogs. We have some other quarterly publications and monthly publications where we're trying to, find different ways to look at labor market information. There's new data every month, every quarter. So things are constantly changing, and we try to keep our users as up to date as possible. We also produce reports and profiles. Some examples of that are the importance of immigration is a report that we published a couple of years back to the labor market. We also publish a racial disparities report by region and for the state as well. We do presentations. I present to chambers of commerce, workforce development boards, high school classes, pretty much anyone that can use the information, which I would argue is anybody that is making informed decisions. We collaborate with our stakeholders. I mentioned workforce development boards, and then we do individual data requests, which a lot of the time are the most interesting thing to me, because a lot of times I will get questions that haven't been asked before, and it's kind of like a scavenger hunt mystery for me to try and figure out how to answer this question the best with the data available. So if you ever have any data questions that you can't answer yourself and would like some assistance, I would love to help you out, no matter how big or small that question is. Just some geography to back you up here. We have a bunch of different jurisdictions, and it can get confusing to folks that are kind of outside of the deed bubble as to what they all mean. Some of the more common ones that we work with are metropolitan statistical areas, planning regions. I mentioned that our regional analysis group is broken up by those planning regions, and you can see those in the upper right. Economic development regions are slightly different and a little bit smaller. For me in Northeast Minnesota, it's great because the economic development region is the same area as the planning region, so I don't have to do a lot of extra work. But for my colleagues in, say, Northwest Minnesota, they have to do a lot more to kind of add things together and subtract to get areas. Workforce development and investment areas, those are super important within our workforce development system, federally, but then also statewide. So we often present data at that level as well. And then counties are typically about the smallest geography that we provide information for. There are a few exceptions to that. but counties can be like the most reliable small geography. Where do we get all these data? A whole bunch of sources. The Census Bureau is probably the biggest one, Bureau of Labor Statistics as well. But then we work with a bunch of different state entities to get data as well. Department of Revenue, Department of Education, State Demographic Center as well. The Minneapolis Fed does a lot of great surveys. Minnesota Works and Career One Stop, all great partners. And I get information wherever I can to answer the questions that are at hand. Okay, diving into some of those LMI concepts. I throw out this term labor force a lot. And early in my tenure, I used to assume that people had a shared understanding of what labor force meant. That is not the case. So I'm going to give you an actual definition. So based off of the civilian non-institutional population that is 16 and older. So basically, if you're not in some sort of institution like incarcerated, this is probably the most common example. Of that population, 16 plus, you're eligible to be in the workforce or in the labor force. And you are determined to be in the labor force if you are working, so employed, or not working and looking for work. So specifically, we'll get into that not working but looking for work breakdown, but those are the two. So if you're 16 and older, not in prison, and you're working or not working and looking for work, you're deemed to be in the labor force. And you can see all the, I love flow charts here, how that kind of breaks down. So if you're unemployed, that means you are not working but looking for work. And then what about all those folks that are not in the labor force? Those are people that are not looking for work and not working. You could break those down as well. So there's folks that do want a job and they just haven't looked in a while. And then there's folks that do not want a job. So the vast majority of this group is those that do not want a job. They're retired, they're not interested in working, etc. But within that want a job, you've got further breakdowns. Folks that just haven't looked in a long time, they're discouraged, or they're working part-time for economic reasons is the way we describe it. There's a lot of different kind of variations here of folks that are not in the labor force, and it's not so black and white as just like you're working and not working. There's a lot of different circumstances behind each individual worker. I mentioned unemployment. The unemployment definition for the numbers that you see monthly that we send out that are published, in national newspapers, state newspapers, local newspapers, that's what we call the U3 unemployment rate. And what that refers to are folks that are not working but have looked for work in the last 4 weeks. So have looked for work in the last month. You can go more detailed, so a larger group or a smaller group of unemployed, depending on what you're looking for. You can see there's 6 different rates of unemployment. The first 3 are kind of what we would think of as folks that are unemployed, either long-term unemployed, which is the smallest. If you go from top to bottom here, U1 to U6, you're adding people each step. And that U4 to U6 involves some of those folks that we would say are out of the labor force. But if the right job came up, they might be interested. The right circumstances came up, they might be interested. So depending on what you're looking for, unemployment is not necessarily one measure as well. Some more terminology. Industry and occupation is often confused as well. The simplest way I can describe the difference is that industry is what the business or employer does. So an example would be a manufacturer, someone that's working in accommodation and food service, construction, mining. Occupation is what the individual worker does. So we can have occupational groups, which are like types of work, but an occupation is what the worker does. So you could have an accountant, which is an occupation in different industries. So accountants are useful in all different types of work, industries, right? So you can have an accountant at a manufacturer, at a hospital, at a restaurant, at a construction firm, et cetera. That's an example of an occupation across industries. And that happens pretty common. A lot of healthcare occupations tend to be focused in the healthcare industry. But for example, if you have like a school nurse, that's a healthcare occupation within the education services sector. This is just an example of that broken out by healthcare and social assistance, which is an industry sector, and manufacturing, which is an industry sector. You can see the variety of different occupations by those two. In healthcare and social assistance, a lot of healthcare occupations, but you also have office clerks, food servers, folks that are working in cafeterias, say at hospitals or clinics. And then in manufacturing, you got engineers, machinists, a lot of occupations you connect probably with manufacturers, but a lot that you might not, sales representatives, laborers, freight, stock, etc. Okay, so those are the terms. I'll pause just for a second. If anybody has any questions to throw into the chat, I can try and answer them real quick. If not, and I've been asking, I've had these memes for a while, so I have some teenage neighbors that are hopefully going to help me update my memes for the new financial year. I'm going to throw another poll out here real quick. So this one is asking, what types of information or data are you interested in? You could select more than one. All right. A good variety so far. And this, again, is not the only data that are available or types of data that are available. These just kind of represent the information that we're going to cover most today. Yeah, okay, so it looks like employment and wage data kind of at the top. Employment projections are up there as well, but it's pretty even, and that's great. That's kind of what I was expecting and hoping for. All right, I will close that poll. Thank you for responding. All right, so moving on. How is the labor market doing? That's the eternal question. And lucky for me, I get to kind of change my answer month to month, week to week, quarter to quarter, depending on the new data. One piece of information that I mentioned already is the unemployment rate, and that is produced monthly. So we know what unemployment represents now, which is great. And now we can see how it differs across the state. So this is based off of the April information, the most recent data we have. Across the state, the unemployment rate was 2.9%, which is still quite low in the historical context. But you could see how that differs by workforce service area, which is on the left. They're broken down by different workforce services areas, and then on the right, counties. Even within those service areas, you could see how counties break down and differ. Northeast Minnesota, we tend to have higher unemployment rates, and a lot of that has to do with a higher concentration of some seasonal jobs and jobs that fluctuate. Mining is one that comes to mind. A lot of, you can see this in Northwest Minnesota as well, a lot of leisure and hospitality jobs as well that kind of fluctuate with the seasons. So you tend to see a little bit higher unemployment because of that, among other things. This is showing the top line, the labor force, so the people that are working or looking for work over the last 4 years. So it's meant to show the pandemic period. The orange line is the number of employed people. That's another term that will, depending on the data source, we're either going to talk about the number of people employed or the number of jobs. Those aren't necessarily the same thing because you can have a person that has multiple jobs, for example. This is the number of individual people. Both the blue and orange line are representing people. And then the gray bars is the unemployment rate. So you can see unemployment spiked at the beginning of the pandemic as a lot of folks were laid off, a lot of businesses were temporarily closed. And then that unemployment rate came down very quickly and has stayed low to the point where we had a historically low unemployment rate in April of last year. It was the lowest in the nation at that point. It might have been revised up slightly, but we had a very, very low unemployment, and it stayed below 3 for over a year, 3%. You can see how that compares to pre-pandemic. The number of jobs. So I mentioned, number of people employed. This is that other measure. This is the number of jobs. And we are still about 14,000 jobs as of April below pre-pandemic levels, so February of 2020. But you can see the recovery has been relatively steady since that trough in April and May of 2020. We added 4,500 jobs compared to last month. So the recovery continues, but it's not quite back yet. And then long-term labor force trends. So this is from 1976 when we started recording in the state. And you can see the bar is the number of people in the labor force, and then the line is the labor force participation rate. So that's the share of folks that could participate that are. That peaked around 2000 and has been declining ever since. It's been a concern in the pandemic period because it fell pretty quickly. You can see that drop on the far right. It's bounced back a little bit, but we're still quite a bit lower in terms of labor force participation. And you could see how if we run that line back, late 1970s, early 80s is kind of where we're comparing to in terms of labor force participation. And that was when women were still starting to participate in the labor force a lot more. So a lot of that decline has to do with aging of the workforce more recently. But the pandemic definitely exacerbated some trends that had already been on their way before the pandemic. And we talk about tight labor market. What does that mean? That means that we have more people, more jobs available than people looking for them. So we have more job vacancies or openings than job seekers. So the black dot is meant to represent the job seeker to job vacancy ratio. You could see how over the years, in the Great Recession, we had a peak of about 8 people looking for jobs compared to 1 opening. And now it's been under 1 for several quarters, both before the pandemic. It peaked a little bit during the peak of the pandemic, but now we're down below half. So that's basically there's more than two or more openings for every person looking for work. And I always make the point that that is just bodies to openings. That is not matching up skills, experiences, educational attainment, et cetera. That of course is put into consideration when an employer is looking for a good fit or a job seeker is looking for a good opening. So it's even more complicated and tighter than this chart shows. All right, so you survived the labor market update and the onslaught of labor market information terminology. I'll kind of pause here as well as we talk about how we get into the tools. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those into the chat again. But we're going to start by navigating to the tools. Oh, okay, there is a question, and I'll answer that. Is labor force participation rate data available on an EDR or county level? This is almost the perfect question. I did not pay Sarah to ask this at this point. The first tool that we're going to cover is going to answer your question, Sarah, but the short answer is yes. And I will show you how to do that in about 4 minutes. I hope that you can navigate around along with me a little bit. There's several different ways to get to our data tools. Web searching mn.gov data tools is an easy way to do that. You can navigate from the DEED homepage if you're familiar with that. So mn.gov/DEED. I will show you how to do that real quick. Or you can type out the mn.gov/DEED/data/data tools. Or if you know the tool that you're looking for by the acronym, you can also do that. I'll pause here for a sec so folks can type it in whichever way they want to. Otherwise, I will show you how I do it. Okay, so I'm on the DEED homepage, and you see these tabs across the top on the banner. Data, that's the one we're looking for. Data tools, that's how you get to our data tool page. You can also, if you know which tool you want, you can just navigate to it right here. I'm going to navigate to the data tools page just by clicking here to show you all the data tools. and kind of go at it that way. But I'll just point out that we've got a bunch of other resources here based on what you're looking for. I encourage you to explore that a little bit. I think we don't quite have time to look into all of that today, but all of our writing and analysis, the economic analysis team does more of the like GDP type stuff. So if that's what you're interested in, they got some of that export, import. And then if you ever have questions, you know, LMI help is always there too. Okay, so data tools. This is what the page looks like. It's just got, and most of our pages are gonna have, like, you're gonna have this gray navigating bar here on the left. So keep an eye out for that. And then all of our data tools with a brief description and the type of information is going to be listed. We have about 24 different data tools. Some of them are ones that you can get at any state, like quarterly census of employment and wages, local area unemployment statistics. Those are tools and data sources that are national. They're kind of mandated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we have those, but then we also have ones that only we produce, like the job vacancy survey, or some combination of different information like occupations in demand. The first one that I want to look at today, and I'm going to pull up. First one I want to look at today. I mentioned some of those tips. Yeah, keep an eye out for that left navigation bar. The tool landing page is often not the tool itself. I'll show you what that means in a second. You've got to look for use the data tool button or tab. If you are interested in learning more about where the data come from, we also have that information, methodology, tutorials, etc. And then if you want to go back, there's always a data to home kind of option in the tool or in the data tool page. Okay, first tool that we want to look at is local area unemployment statistics. So Sarah asked if there's labor force participation rate available on the EDR or county level. And actually, I got too excited when Sarah asked that question, but labor force employment and unemployment numbers are available in Laos. Labor force participation rate is available for the state. It's the smaller geographies where we don't have labor force participation rates via Laos. Those numbers do exist, and we will get to those, Sarah, but labor force participation rates are not available below the statewide level. But you do get detailed information on labor force, the number of people in the labor force, the number of people employed, and unemployment rates and unemployment numbers down to the county and medium to large city. So this is a monthly and annual series that has been produced since 1976. I mentioned that it's statewide down to small cities, planning regions, metropolitan statistical areas, workforce service areas, economic development regions, you know, so kind of these in-between geographies. You see an example of a screenshot of the tool there on the right. There's a bunch of different Northeast Minnesota geography levels listed there, along with the information that's available. You can see there's an NA for labor force participation rate and NA for employment to population ratio. Those are available at the statewide level. But we have all the other data that go all the way down to the smallest geography. So let's navigate to Laos. If you were on that data tools page, it's in alphabetical order. So you can go down and just click on the link. You can just look for these underlined kind of blue links, let you know that they're clickable. This is what the landing page looks like. All of our landing pages look relatively similar. You'll have the title, the data tool. I mentioned look for the link. So this is the landing page, not the tool itself. And then about Laos. So that'll give you a bunch of information on how these data are collected. Suffice it to say, it's from a survey conducted of households across the nation, and then we get information kind of catered and analyzed for Minnesota. The release schedule and LMI help, a little description of what the tool offers. You can also get to the data tool here, so those will get you to the same place. And then oftentimes what we'll do on the landing page is we'll have a little visualization that summarizes some of the information. So maybe you don't want to dive into all the detail that the tool offers, you just kind of want the top level description. we try to create tools to provide that with some Tableau visualization. So this is just the most recent data by county and for some of the cities. So you can just get that real quick if that's what you're looking for and don't want to use the tool. But this is not the tool. This, clicking on the data tool link, is what the tool looks like. This is the initial page. I mentioned data home. So if you got here by mistake and you want to go back, you can always click there. Or if you want to go back to the Laos homepage, you can just click on that and that'll get you back. All right. So the first step is selecting the geographies that you're interested in. You can see all the different options here from the US. I mentioned it's a national program, so we do have national numbers as well. Minnesota counties, large Minnesota cities. Large, that kind of depends on who you ask. You got cities like Virginia, which up here in the range, they only have like 6,000-ish people. So it goes down pretty small, in my opinion. I'd say it's medium to large Minnesota cities. Minnesota micropolitan statistical areas, so that's smaller statistical areas that usually consist of a county or two. Metropolitan statistical areas are the large ones like Duluth, Superior, Rochester, Mankato, Fargo, Moorhead. Those are metro areas. Twin Cities, which is 7 different counties. The workforce service areas we talked about, and the EDRs. So let's do an example here, and we'll do Minnesota, and you can select more than one by holding Control-click. I'll do counties. We'll show you what those large cities look like, and we'll do a workforce service area. It lists the options based off of what you selected before by geography type. I want Minnesota, so I have to select that again. I'm interested in workforce service area 5 in central Minnesota. And let's see. I'm also interested in how Beltrami and Cook County are doing. And then it'll list all the cities, so you can see an example of like size of cities. So you've got a lot of cities in the metro area, suburbs, but then you've got, oh man, I made a mistake. I clicked without holding Control, so it got rid of all these other ones up here. Something that will probably happen a couple times, so I'll just reselect. Okay, now holding Control, I got in here. I got Cloquet. Let's see how Hutchinson's doing, and Owatonna. So I got them selected, so now I'm going to click View Current Statistics. All right, so this is what the landing page looks like after you've selected. And you can see the different data that are available. You've got your area title here, labor force, so that's the number of people that are working or looking for work for each of those areas. The labor force participation rate, you see it's only available for the Minnesota options. And you've got Minnesota here, which is non-seasonally adjusted, and then you have Minnesota seasonally adjusted. The difference between those two is just that we kind of smooth out the different variations that happen every year. So that's what you get in the seasonally adjusted. We don't, all of the other geographies and data other than Minnesota seasonally adjusted are unadjusted. So all these will be non-seasonally adjusted, just a heads up. Employment, so number of people working, employment to population ratio, that's of the total population that could be working, what share is. So that's slightly different from the labor force participation rate. And then unemployment, so that's the number of people that are unemployed. And the unemployment rate is just this unemployment number divided out of the labor force number. And then you get 2.9%, 2.8%. And you can see how that varies for the smaller areas. Let's say you want to go into a little more detail on Beltrami County. You can click on the title here. So click on that and you'll get detailed monthly data for that area going back several years. So you can see all of the information here back to 2000. So for some of the smaller areas, you won't go all the way back to 1976. And then you can get the download data option here. So if I click on that, I'll get an Excel file. It looks basically like this, just a table in Excel. I'll open it up so you can see it. So yeah, same deal, same format, but that's how it looks when you get it in an Excel file. Let's say I wasn't necessarily interested in Beltrami. I hit the back. I'm in the same order. I want to see a comparison of historical data for all these. So it's a different way to look at it. I keep all of them, but it's historical listing. And you can see here the frequency. You can either do monthly or annual. Let's say I want annual. I want to start in 2008 and 2023. I'm more interested in the labor force number and seasonally adjusted because I know that most of them are seasonally adjusted, not seasonally adjusted. So I want to be able to compare across. And then when I've got what I want in these filters, I hit update. And there we go. We get the labor force compared across the different geographies that we're interested in. And you can download this as well, and you'll just get the information that you selected here. So you won't get all of the unemployment rates, employment, et cetera. But this is a way to get labor force information. You could kind of take this and use it with the population to get like a rough labor force participation rate, as Sarah was asking. But I recommend using the census data that we'll cover here shortly for those labor force participation rates, that because they're using the same source for numerator and denominator. All right, so that's Laos. Any questions before we move on? Very good. So yeah, labor force, unemployment, employment, monthly. That's the benefit of Laos, is that it's monthly, and a lot of these data sources aren't updated as often as Laos is. We're going to go back to data home, which is our data center. So that is one step up from our data tools, but you can see here on the left that we have the gray navigation bar. I'm going to go back to the data tools and pull up PowerPoint. Okay, so that was Laos. The next tool that I want to discuss is the quarterly census of employment and wages. So this I would describe as kind of our most exhaustive source of information for employment and wages by industry throughout the state. I mentioned the unemployment insurance program before. That is the source for these data. So when a business that pays into unemployment insurance does so quarterly, as is mandated, they include a bunch of information on wages, number of jobs added, et cetera. So we get all that data and we can have a very, very detailed picture of employment and wages down to pretty small geographies, even smaller than Laos. And that is because it covers about 95% of all jobs. There's self-employment, which won't be covered in QCEW. So that's one big thing. And then some of those jobs that are most common in self-employment, such as agriculture or farm jobs. Some of those won't be covered, but if it's a larger business in agriculture and pays into UI, they will be represented in QCW. So this is probably the best source for industry employment and wage data throughout the state. And it is published, as the title implies, quarterly. So that's also nice. So number of establishments is another thing that's available. Average wages. I mentioned that we get detailed geography. It's quarterly back to 2000. So we've got over 20 years of data, which is great. And then another piece that is probably very little known is called the business employment dynamics. So what we offer through BED, our job is kind of the underlying churn. So this is if you go from one quarter to the next and you've got 1,000 jobs in arts, entertainment, and recreation in Sherburne County, the next quarter you've got 1,200 jobs. That's a 200 net change, but there's a ton of churn that happens underneath that. And the business employment dynamics covers that by saying, okay, 250 jobs were added in that sector by businesses that opened, but 300 jobs were lost by businesses that contracted. So you can get the detail on how that turnover and churn is happening kind of underneath the surface as well, which is really fantastic and maybe an underused resource. Okay, so An example of some of the data in action. This is kind of the top line, what we use to just kind of show in a specific area how industry sector employment kind of relates to each other. So this is Northeast Minnesota 2022 annual data by industry sector. So the number of jobs, number of business establishments, the average annual wage, and then the total payroll. So that's, the total number of dollars that are paid to all the workers in that sector in that year. So you can see, healthcare and social assistance, Northeast Minnesota makes up about 1/5 of all jobs. So the biggest sector, followed by retail, accommodation, and food services. But then you can see how the wages vary across all those, and then the number of business establishments as well. So you can get like a size, an average number of employees per establishment, things like that. All right, let's navigate down to QCW in the data tool page. So I'm just clicking on the title again. This is what the QCW landing page looks like. It's similar to Laos, right? You've got data tool, some more instructions, tutorials, another tool that uses QCW data to look at concentration of employment. I gotta mention that because I created that a couple months ago. I'm kind of proud of it. I don't think we'll have time to look at it today, but check it out on your own time. It's kind of fun. A tutorial if I'm moving too fast today and you need to kind of work to your own speed. That's totally cool. I understand. We've got information and resources for you to do that. This again is just a high level tool to kind of, if you don't want to dive into the detail of the tool, this is available here to give you, number of jobs, the recent change and what's been happening over the last 3 years. Some useful visualizations. It won't cover everything, of course, but for, I'd say, the average user, this will get you what you need. So this is basically what I just showed you in that table in PowerPoint. Employment establishments, average wage, average payroll for Northeast Minnesota. You can filter by those industry sectors if you want. So this is another great tool, but it's not the tool. The tool is available via the data tool link here. And initially what you'll get is statewide data for these, we'll call them super sectors. So you can see, I'll kind of go across these steps here in a second, but the table right here, these are the actual QCW data. You've got tabs, so the different type of information that are available. It starts with employment. So that's the number of jobs by those super sector, by quarter, or annual. So annual is just averaged across those 4 quarters. Establishments is the same idea, but for the number of businesses. Wages, that's total payroll. So in each quarter, that's the total payroll within that quarter. It's not an average. And then the annual is a sum of those 4 quarters, not an average like employment and establishments would be. Average weekly wages is an average. So it's weekly. It's not, I would say, the period of time that is most useful, but you can get annual wages really easily just by multiplying by 52, which is what I typically end up doing. People have a better grasp of like what an annual wage means than a weekly wage, or maybe you have a great grasp of what weekly wages means and this is perfect for you, and that's great. And then these ones with stars, that's that business employment dynamics data I was talking about. So you can see gross gains and losses by those different sectors or super sectors or industries. And this lags a little bit from what we have because we have to wait several quarters to determine whether it's an actual gain or whether, the next quarter it kind of bounces back. So we have to wait a while to publish BED data. And if you want to dive into BED, there's a whole bunch more, job gains from expansions, job gains from openings, all those different breakdowns I mentioned. But we're focused more on these first 4 tabs here. Okay, so if you don't want to look at the super sector of Minnesota, you're interested in a different area or a different industry or different time period, this is how you do it. You see the steps across the top. I start here to select area, so I'm going to change that. I'm taken to this page where it says select area. These are all the different geographies that are available. Similar to Laos, I would say the biggest breakdown here is that it divides cities by over 20,000 employees and under 20,000. If you don't know, you can just kind of select both and see what's available. Parts of cities I don't use a ton. There's a few in there. I'm not sure. I think it's a vestige of some older geographic definitions, but EDRs, planning areas, are available. So let's do Minnesota, county, planning region, and we'll do big and small cities just so you can kind of see what's available. So those are the ones, again, I held control down and clicked the ones I wanted. I hit next. It takes me to step 2. Or sorry, I'm still in step 1. I have to select the actual areas now. So the counties I'm interested in, let's see what Asante County is up to. Winona. And then, okay, these are the large cities. There's probably about 30 of them. And it gives you the county that they're in as well. St. Cloud is interesting because St. Cloud stretches across 3 different counties. So it's saying largely Stearns, but it's all of St. Cloud. It's just telling you which county it's mostly in. I'll do Minneapolis and Lakeville, and then small. We go down to townships, so very small areas. Granted, there won't be as much information available the smaller you go, but you'll probably get total number of jobs for pretty much every location listed here. So, what's a small one that's kind of fun? Big Fork is pretty small. I'm going to Bovee this weekend, so we'll take a look there too. Focusing on Itasca County. Actually, we should get one in Santee. It's by alphabetical order, so there is some scrolling that sometimes is required. But if you know where it is, relatively, you can use this little drop bar to kind of move it a little quicker. What was the other county that I said? Winona County? How about Winona? Wisconsin Township. I don't know where that is. All right. Interesting. Oh, Winona, you know why Winona's not listed here? It's one of those big cities. I was like, where's Winona? My alphabet is struggling today. There we go. Okay, hit next once I got them all selected. And you'll notice that, okay, we've got the different geographies listed here, along with the, we call them super sectors. They're all listed, and they're kind of by county, and I'm not exactly sure what the sorting mechanism is here, but they're all listed on the side, and all of the different sectors will be together by the area. So you can see all the ones we selected, but we're not yet to where we want, because we don't want these super sectors. The other thing that is available to select by is by ownership. So that's step 3. And the options here are, total of all government, federal, state, local. We've got detailed information on government because there's no suppression that is on that. So we're not trying to protect any confidentiality of employers because they're government employers. But when it comes to private employers, if the numbers get small enough where they could be used to identify a company, we can't publish them. So if you know that there's a manufacturer in your small township and it's not showing up, that may be because they're the only manufacturer in the township. And if we publish that information, it's identifying data for them. So a lot of times that'll be the reason why we suppress some information that's not included. I'm usually most interested in total of all ownerships. I want to get all of the jobs. But you can look at them and compare them. So I've got total of all ownerships by those super sectors. I'm still not super interested in all of that. I wanted total all industries. So these are all the different industries that are available. You could use these buttons here to select if you know kind of what detail level you want and get all of them. Sectors is a popular one. That's what I showed you before in the example. So you can use that. Or if you want to go more detailed, the more digits, the more detail. So this is using the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS, if you've heard of that. It's basically the industry categorization structure. And if you don't know what things fall under here, you can expand each of these to get the more detail. So these 2-digit ones here, that's your sector. If you want to go even more detail, that's, I would say that's what we call technically an industry, those 3 digits. And you can go as detailed as 6 digits for an industry. It won't be necessarily the case that it's available everywhere, but we do have that level of detail, and the larger you go in terms of geography, the more likely you'll be able to get that information for that industry. So I want to pick just, let's see, construction of buildings, and I'm also interested in manufacturing, but more specifically, I'm interested in chemical manufacturing. So let's see what that looks like. I've got those selected, and then I hit next. All right, so now where it's available, I've got total industries, construction of buildings, chemical manufacturing. So that's all available for Minnesota. You notice that only construction and total are available for Sandia County. That's because we don't have enough chemical manufacturing employment there. That doesn't mean that there isn't any. It just means that there probably is. It's few enough establishments where that information might be suppressed. And you can see we only have total all industries for Bovie and Big Fork, smaller economies there, so fewer employers. May not be construction of buildings or chemical manufacturing, but you can see here the number of jobs by quarter in those industries and how those add up annually. And you can change the year as well. That's pretty straightforward. Maybe I want 3 years worth. I just control selected there, and then you'll get the years from earliest to latest from bottom to top, again by those areas, by those industries. If this is kind of like hard for you to look at and compare, you can download information. I'm going to do that and show you what it looks like in the spreadsheet, because it's not it's a little hard to parse. So I just want to talk through it real quick. So I'm downloading basically what's in the table here. And this is what the Excel spreadsheet looks like when you get it, and you're kind of like, whew, okay, that's a lot. But I'll try and simplify it for you a little bit. It's got the same format here where you've got your year, you've got your NAICS title, so that's your industry sector title, industry code, that lines up with the industry, ownership code, so that'll just, I'm more interested in the ownership title. You got 0, that represents total all ownerships. You got your area name here. FIPS, these are just like code to identify the area. Industry level, so that'll match up with your code here. Don't worry about K, that's not super. But then this is what you're most interested in. Average EMP1, so that's employment for quarter 1, quarter 2, 3, 4. We do the same thing for establishments. Est 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the number of business establishments by quarter. Total wage by quarters. Average weekly wage by quarters. But then you've got the annual numbers here. So this is the annual average employment, average establishments, total wage, so that's the sum of those 4 quarters of total wage, and then your average weekly wage across the 4 quarters as well. And then everything from AF on, that's all that business employment dynamics stuff. And I'm happy to go into that separately with anybody that's interested. Okay, any quick questions on QCW? There's a lot going on in there, but it's a great resource for industry, employment, and wage. All right, we're gonna go back. I'm just gonna use the back button here. Now we'll go data home. Okay, we're gonna take, we'll say a 3 to 4 minute break till a little after 10. allow you to grab a cup of coffee, ask any quick questions, and then we'll get right back to it at about 10:01, 10:02. And feel free to use your microphone and ask any questions too right now if you have any. For those that are interested, Gordy is the kind of gray cat, and Ray Ray is the black and white one. And we talked about the labor force and the aging of the labor force. The immigration is, of course, an important way to increase the labor force, so that it's kind of the quickest, most direct way to increase the number of potential workers. A slower way is to grow them, and we're doing our part. That's Siggy. So she'll be probably entering the labor force in 16-ish years if she chooses. Sarah, I'm going to be getting to your question here. Labor force participation rate at detailed level. The EDR question, you kind of have to piece it together using counties. So you know what counties kind of create your EDR, because the U.S. Census Bureau, which we're going to talk about, doesn't publish economic development region data specific for Minnesota. But if you know the area you're interested in and the counties, you can kind of recreate it, or ask a regional labor market analyst to recreate it for you. Okay, dive right back into it. This one is probably going to be of great interest to a lot of folks. Grant writing, economic development, etc. Census data is a fantastic resource, but sometimes I find that even myself just get overwhelmed at the amount of information that's available, and just how do I find what I'm looking for can be a constant struggle. It can also be a source of job security for us that traffic in census data, but perhaps unnecessarily. So we're going to talk a little bit about data.census.gov. So that's at least easy to remember, right? That's the URL to get to data.census.gov, the data viewer and finder for the Census Bureau. So it's an extensive source of demographic, economic, socioeconomic data, dozens of different sources of information. The most familiar probably are the Decennial Census, American Community Survey. I'll talk a little bit about what those mean when we look at some of the data. I could spend multiple days talking about data.census.gov and the information available. So today, for our purposes, we're going to focus on a few things that I think can get you kind of what you need the quickest and most often. If it happens where it doesn't answer your question, or there's a more detailed kind of question you're asking, come to us, your regional analyst, and we'll be happy to help you find what you're looking for. But hopefully what I'm going to share here today will get you the bulk, maybe like 75% of the information that you would be using. All right, so data.census.gov. I've got a link in the presentation, so you'll have that when I send it out, but you can also just type that into your browser. So this is what the page looks like when you show up. And it used to be called American Fact Finder, which a lot of data analysts and nerds really liked. They liked what American Fact Finder offered, but I would say data.census.gov is growing on me. They've definitely worked at improving it. There's still some things that can be improved, of course, but it's got a ton of information and some cool ways of looking at it. Like you could do maps now really pretty easily. And another thing that is super useful. So this is probably the most useful piece, I would say, if you're able to take something away from today, is being able to generate a place profile. So I'm in the search bar here, and basically what I am trying to do is find a bunch of like really useful information that may be across different surveys, different tables, but I don't have time or the expertise to go searching for all of that. So I just want a summary in my lap. And data.census.gov, to its credit, does that pretty easily. So let's say I want to find all those top line pieces of information for my city. I type in Duluth. You'll see that there's a couple different options here. There are other Duluths, go figure. I think I get the Georgia one pretty often, but I'm interested in the Duluth, and it says city, so that's how you know what type it is. You could also get like the metropolitan statistical area. So make sure that it's if you're looking for a city, that's what you're interested in, or if you're looking for a county, that shows up. So let's say, I want to do St. Louis. See, this is a good example because you've got county, Missouri, but St. Louis County, Minnesota isn't necessarily the top option. There you go, there you see it. So you can see that's the county. I'll go back to Duluth. And oftentimes a map will show up here so you can know you're in the right place. I'm gonna click on that map. And it takes a little while because we're pulling data from dozens of different sources. But I promise it's worth the wait. What you're going to get is a data profile for the area you selected. Eventually. All right, cool. All right, so we know we're in the right place. We got the map. The top line stuff that you'll see, population, total population, that's your first number. You've got your median household income, the share of folks with a bachelor's degree or higher, that employment rate. That's not your labor force participation rate. That's the employment to population ratio. Total housing units, share of folks without health insurance, total number of households, number of Hispanic or Latino folks. So that's like a selection, right? But then if you want even more detail, it breaks it out by topic. So populations and people, you got your median age, how that compares to Minnesota. Duluth is younger. We've got a lot of colleges and cities tend to be younger than the state as a whole. Your population pyramid, how that compares to Minnesota. For some reason, they threw up Italian ancestry in Duluth. I'm not sure why they picked Italian, but then you get the breakdown for some other, it looks like largely European. Language spoken at home, native or foreign born. It's like a lot of information here that maybe you don't need, but the fact that it's all available kind of at your fingertips is super, super nice. Population distributions. So, what share of your population is 65 to 74, 75 to 84, et cetera. Residential mobility. Veterans. So those are all the populations and people measures. Income and poverty is the next kind of big one. And I'll also point out when it catches up. So it's pulling in a bunch of information from those relevant resources. You can see the different topics as they're available up here. So as you scroll down, you can see, but you can also skip to them if you're, just interested in education or employment, for example. It's really working hard. I can tell you what's going to be showing up here. You're going to get median household income. You're going to get a poverty rate broken down by household or family type or age of person. So yep, here's median household income. Median income by family type. So whether it's married couple family, non-family households, your poverty rate for all people. It's double in Duluth compared to Minnesota. And then here's what I mentioned, under 18, the poverty rate is 14%, 20% from 18 to 64, 8.8% for 65 and older. And I meant to point this out earlier, you have the table that each of these is pulled from and ostensibly a link to it. The links don't really work. So that's not super useful, but you can use this table to search and then get the full detail. So you could throw that table number, which is S1701 for poverty, into the search bar and get that information. So I think that this profile is fantastic because it gives you the kind of intro to finding the information that is most relevant. And then let's say, okay, yeah, I'm interested in finding a little bit more about poverty that maybe isn't shown in these two tables here. You can go into that S1701 table and get even more detail on poverty for the place that you're focusing on. So it's super useful, and you don't need to memorize the table numbers. I do have a census table key that I've kind of maintained and built that has tables and the description of what they offer, because that actually isn't anywhere on the website that I've been able to find. And it helps to just kind of remember which tables have been most useful for certain things. So I'll share that out as well afterward. Education, I'm of course interested in employment. So I'm going to click on that employment one. I'm also going to show you, okay, hopefully catches up. There we go. Employment's going to show you the labor force participation rate, I believe. So this is how you get that information for below the state geography, Sarah, that you were asking about. This will be the source, or table S2301, I believe, is employment status, which will give you, number of people working, employment to population ratio, labor force size and participation rate, unemployment. That is a super useful table to remember for those types of things, and I'll make sure to share that out as well. Okay, so here's the employment information. Yeah, apologies for how slow it's going. Maybe I'll close some of these other tabs. I want to show you what an actual table looks like. Okay, so I'll show you what I'm going to, what the table looks like. A good question by Julie here. I'll get to your question here in a second. All right, so this is what a table will look like if it loads. And these are the data that are being pulled into the profile. So this example is for school enrollment, and it's by age, so you can get how many people are enrolled in school by age, which is super useful for some grant writing purposes, because you can get like where folks are not enrolled or kind of disengaged from education system, and you can also get it broken down by public private school. So this is S1401 is the name of that table. Is just an example of where you see the table names. You can see some other related tables here. I'll also point out when you're looking at the table that there's this drop down. We're looking at 1 year estimates. So if you have a big enough geography, so enough people in it, you can get 1 year American Community Survey estimates. Most of the time, you're just going to get 5 year. I think the breakoff point is like 40,000 or 65,000. So you need to be above that to be able to estimate for a single year. Otherwise, I like using the 5 year estimates too, because they just are a lot more accurate. You're using more information. It may not be as timely, but you've got a better kind of estimate than you would for just a single year. So I like using the ACS 5 year estimates for a lot of purposes, especially for smaller areas. And you get the margin of error too, so you can see how that changes. Let's see. Okay, Julie said in the census data, you can see program enrollment, training, and prior employment status stats, but can we see Wagner-Peiser data anywhere? I am looking for the US participation in program stats and to compare Minnesota. Yeah, great question. I do not believe that that information is available via the Census Bureau, or at least this site, but that is a question I'll have to answer afterwards, Julie. Thank you for that, because I do not know the answer off the top of my head. Thank you, though. All right, so this is, yeah, Census Bureau. You can download the information. You can download the table by clicking, Excel, CVS, CSV, or zip. What I like to do if I find a table that I like with the geographies I like, so you can change the geographies here by clicking on this icon. Let's say I've got Duluth, but I want to add state of Minnesota. I can do that. I can also, let's say I'm interested in St. Louis County. You get the drop down by state. So you could add counties from different states. Basically any way you want to slice and dice it, they allow you to do that. Okay, I got St. Louis County. So now it should be across the top, the different geographies that I selected for that table. And sure enough, yep, I got it across the top. But it's tough to see it all in this table. So let's say you want to download it and see it for yourself. You can do it either here, this download table data. That gets you one kind of way of looking at it. It's a different format than if you do Excel. I like doing Excel because then I get it in this same format. I'll show you what it looks like. It gives you, if you're like worried about forgetting the table name, which is understandable, it gives you some metadata behind the table so you can kind of recall where you got it from. So that's what this page does, the information. So you got your table ID and then the actual data are here. So it's the same format you were looking at on the site. Your percent of population that are enrolled by age, just a ton of data in here. And if you ever have any questions on how to interpret any of it, I can definitely help you out with that as well. Okay, any quick questions on census data? I know that it was just kind of a brief intro, but I would say you get to data.census.gov, type in your area that you're interested in, and start with that profile, that place profile, and then you can kind of build off of that, get the different tables you're interested in for more detailed information. But typically it'll have all the data you need right there to get started. Excellent. Okay. There's the Census Bureau. There's the table format I was just showing. The next one I want to talk about is quarterly workforce indicators. So this is a Census Bureau tool as well. It's got basically all the same data that we talked about with quarterly census of employment and wages, but it adds in the demographic information. So you can get age, race and ethnicity, sex, and educational attainment as well by worker. So some example questions, and this is down to the county level. Some example questions could be, which industry has the largest share or number of BIPOC workers in the Duluth metro statistical area? That's what this is. These data shown here, I pulled from quarterly workforce indicators. So you can see, healthcare is the largest industry. Perhaps no surprise that it also has the largest share of BIPOC, or not the largest share, but the largest number of BIPOC workers. If we look at share, it changes. Arts, entertainment, and recreation has the highest share of BIPOC workers as a share of that industry's employment. Healthcare actually moves down quite a bit, below average, I believe. Yep, yeah, only 8.7% of all workers in healthcare and social assistance into the Duluth MSA identify as BIPOC. How has the share of teenage employment changed since 2000 is another question you could ask. So this is the breakdown by age group. So number of jobs or share of jobs by age group in the Duluth MSA over the last 22 years. You can see that top darkest area has thickened and widened over the last 20 years as our population and workforce age. Those top older age groups tend to have a larger share of workers. No surprise. And then which industry employs the largest share of workers with at least a bachelor's? There it is. Educational services is the top. I guess that kind of reflects well on the educational system. Professional, scientific, and technical services is like architecture and engineering, utilities. And again, this is specific to the Duluth MSA. Okay, so the QWI data are available through what we call the QWI Explorer. So that's what this tool I'll be showing you here is. So QWIExplorer.ces.census.gov is the URL to get to this spot. I'll just throw it in the chat so you can follow along. All right, it starts out with Minnesota, and there's a lot of stuff to work with here. Geography, that's where you can select your counties or your metro areas, or usefully, it's got workforce service areas, which is fantastic. So let's say I want to do that. I'm interested in Northeast Minnesota and City of Duluth, which is its own workforce service area. And when you select multiple, it combines them. So this is all of Northeast Minnesota that we're looking at. And this is age by quarter for the last 5-6 years. So how employment has changed by age and quarter in that area. You can decide whether you want yearly averages. Let's say I want to look at sex instead of age, so you can see how that changes. And it's great because you can like hover over the different measure in the graph, and it tells you what you're looking at, both in terms of time and sex. Same thing with education and race and ethnicity. So some fantastic information here. We'll do race. And the other really, really cool thing about QWI is it's not just employment. You can choose your indicator. So I mentioned in BED, Business Employment Dynamics, you can kind of get at some of that turnover. You can do hires, you can do separations, and just kind of general turnover as well. So that could be another useful thing to look at, as well as earnings. So if you want to see how pay differs across these different groups within or across different industries, you can do that as well. And you can also look at different industries, detailed industries. So let's say I want to look at industry sectors and race and ethnicity, how that varies across different sectors in Northeast Minnesota. So that's what this is looking at for the most recent quarter. And you can download these data as well and get a report. I like to do the download XLSX, and that gives you a chart, table, kind of all the metadata. I'll show you what it looks like. So in Excel, your table will look like this. So that's your table, your counts, your metadata saying, basically what you are looking at. If there's suppressed data or not enough, it'll tell you that too. And then you've got your bar chart, which is just another way to kind of look at by industry and race and how that varies across the economy. So a lot of fantastic detail available via QWI. And if you have any questions on whether it's possible to pull certain information, you can just send me that question as well. Any questions on QWI? This is just kind of a glimpse into what's possible because there's a whole ton more as well that just don't have time to cover today. I will mention that you could do the same thing as in QCW and select all ownership. And you can even do firm age and firm size as well. So let's say you're just interested in small businesses and how how employees differ or look in small businesses as opposed to large businesses. You can do that too. Okay, I think I got time to maybe squeeze in one more tool. And I am going to do OEWS, which is Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics. So we had quarterly census of employment and wages, which is industry data. OEWS is kind of the same idea, but for occupations. So again, what the workers themselves do. These data are available by industry, so you can see how an occupation varies across industry. The 6 planning regions, the 13 economic development regions, as well as 8 metropolitan statistical areas. And these data are only updated once a year, and they only go down to those regional levels. We don't have county data for OEWS. All right, I'm gonna go to the landing page. I'll throw it in the chat here so you can follow along. Occupational employment and wage statistics. This one's got a little handy data, use data tool pill. Again, if you're looking for kind of that high level summary, we have that Tableau visualization down there, but we're just gonna go in the tool right now. The initial landing page is going to be statewide data when it shows up here. Okay, so you'll first get the listing of all the available options for geographies. And then down below is going to be the table with the actual data. Like QCW, you've got employment and wages. You don't have those other measures, but wages tends to be the most useful data from OEWS. But then you also have the number of jobs by occupation and occupational group. So first thing you do is select your area you're interested in. Statewide and nationwide come pre-selected. I'm not as interested in nationwide. I want to see how EDR 8 Southwest is doing, and I'm also interested in the Mankato MSA. So I select them, checkbox. If you're not interested, you can hover over counties to see kind of where they fit in. So, Blue Earth is in EDR 9, South Central, Southwest Minnesota Planning Region, and the Mankato MSA. You can also click on the county and it will select the relevant geographies over here for you. So that's another way to select. You have to hit go in order to submit the selection. Otherwise, it won't show up in the data. So definitely select go. And then that will show up down here. So I've got Minnesota, EDR 8, Mankato, MSA. We start with median wages. So you've got the median wage here for total all occupations. You can see how that differs across the 3 areas. If I click on this employment, you can see the number of jobs. And that'll be slightly different than QCW because this is from a different data source, right? And then occupational title. We start out with the broad occupational groups, and then you can drill down into specific occupations within those occupational groups. So for example, management occupations, chief executives, all those different manager positions will be listed there. So you can explore occupational groups to find occupations you're interested in. There's 23 different occupational groups. Or if you don't want to mess around with that, you can also use the search function here and say type in, let's say I'm interested in some different nurse occupations. Hey, type it in, hit search, and then you get another drop down that gives you some options that might be similar or relevant to what you're looking for. Oh, okay, nurse practitioners is what I was most interested in. So I select that, I hit search again, and then it will filter out to just that occupation. And here's where, so you start out with the median wages, you can see that. And then if you click on the actual title, it takes you to the detailed occupation data page, which has a whole bunch of great information. So occupational description, your title, and then you've got not just the median wage here, but the whole distribution of wages, the whole wage range starting from 10th all the way up to 90th, including 25th and 75th. Because let's say you're starting out, you're not going to be starting out necessarily at a median wage. So if you want to set a wage for some entry level positions, you might be looking at that 10th to 25th percentile, or if it's, advanced skills or experience, you might be looking at that 75th to 90th percentile wages. We also have mean number of jobs there for in that occupation. I mentioned that we have the data across industry, so you can see the vast majority are in education and health services sector, super sector. You've got a couple across other industries, but that makes sense that it's focused in healthcare. And then you also get all the data here for those other regions. So it's from least employment to most, the median wage, and then for the planning regions in the state, we have the projected change. Nursing practitioners is going to be booming, we're predicting, over the next 10 years, almost doubling in some places, which is wild. And then similar related occupations. So let's say you clicked on one, you weren't completely sure that's what you're looking for. I was actually looking for nurse midwives. You can click on that and then go to that detailed occupational page as well. And then a lot of tasks for that occupation. So a lot of great information here kind of at your fingertips if you're looking at detailed occupational data, and that can be useful to what you're looking for. Any questions on OEWS? Otherwise, I'm already out of time, and this always goes faster than I plan. I am going to stick around. I have one or two examples of information how you could use it in a grant. So apologies I didn't get to that in the time we had. I will send out the presentation, all these links to these different data tools and some descriptions. And of course, I'm always available for any questions. So apologies, I didn't get through everything on my agenda, but I really appreciate you taking the time to sit with me today and listen to me talk about the different tools we have available, the data sources. Again, I am going to stick around, so if you want to, feel free to, but we are at time. So thank you so much to everybody for joining me this morning. And I'll take a few minutes here to answer questions. Thanks, Julie. I'll say that, yeah, the endless possibilities part is kind of what makes it tough to decide what to focus on and to fit it into an hour and a half. So thank you for that. And yeah, if anybody has any specific questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them now. Yeah, I hope I will do that because yeah, I apologize. I was hoping to kind of get to some of that, but I have some slides here with some examples and possible sources, and I'll make sure to send that along. So thank you for that. Yeah, I didn't even get to talk about On the Map, which is one of my favorite tools. It just I wouldn't have been able to really describe it in the time we had allotted. So I definitely bit off more than I could chew. But On the Map is another fantastic tool, especially for economic development questions. I'll get like some site selection kind of data requests asking for, in a 45-minute drive radius from a certain location, what's the labor like market look like how many available workers are there, et cetera. On the Map can answer those types of questions because you can create your own custom geography, which is super, super great. Yeah, I will keep going, Julie. Thanks for that. So On the Map, super powerful data tool. I can show you a little bit about how that works, but the example I think is probably coolest is that you can pick an area such as Duluth, and you can see how many workers live in Duluth versus commute in and live elsewhere, and live and work in Duluth. And that can kind of tell you a lot about, are you a place that a lot of folks commute to or from? Do you have some advantages in terms of location of businesses, or are a lot of folks kind of leaving your area to go work elsewhere? So that is a super, super great use of On the Map. I think I'll at least show you what it looks like here. On the map.ces.census.gov, throw that in the chat. All right. It's a national resource, so you can look wherever, not just limited to Minnesota. I'll zoom in using the map. You can also search here for an area if you're interested. So let's say I am interested in Anoka County. I click this little selection tab up here. There's a bunch of different ways to create your geography. I'm interested in the whole county, so I'm selecting county here. And then I'm going to just draw a point. I think that's the easiest within the county. I can see it here. So I drew my point, I clicked in there, and I'm confirming my selection as Anoka, and then it highlights Anoka County because I used the layer selection for counties. If I were to change that to cities or places, it would just do the whatever city I put that dot in. And I would like to perform an analysis on this selection area because it's the area that I wanted. And then the analysis settings window will pop up. So since this is commuting data sets, we have both where workers live and where workers work. It can get a little confusing sometimes, but you can decide what you want to focus on. Are you more interested in where workers are coming from or where they're going to in terms of where they're employed? And it's not always the case that a worker is commuting from Duluth to Minneapolis, for example. Remote work is going to be a larger and larger role in these data. But for the most part, these are through 2020, so they're still going to largely reflect people that are actually, their place of work is going to be pretty accurate. Okay, so you have your overall area profile. We'll start with that. 2020 is the most recent data year. You can do for all jobs, primary jobs, so it's just one person, one job, all private jobs, or private primary jobs. It selects private primary jobs by default. I like all jobs. I just want to know, kind of the whole story. So I hit that and hit go. And you can see the little purple dots pop up. Those are actually all of the jobs. So that's where they're located, which is kind of cool to see visually. So they're focused along the Mississippi as you get closer to the cities. So that makes a lot of sense as you get more into more rural Anoka County, fewer a smaller density of jobs. But then over on the right here, this is kind of probably the most useful part. This is the profile section. So you've got the total number of jobs in Anoka County as of 2020, broken out by some age categories, broken out by some wage categories. So you can see, more than half of those jobs are making more than $3,333 per month. I think these wage categories are probably due for an update. I think they used to represent low, medium, and high wage, but with wage growth, especially recently, they may not reflect that as accurately now. And then you've got your breakdown by industry sector. So, the different industries we talked about, same as QCEW, QWI, worker race, and ethnicity, educational attainment, and sex. So a lot of these same data are used in QWI, but you get that spatial component here, which is really, really kind of cool. But let's say you are interested in that kind of inflow, outflow profile I was looking at. That's this one down at the bottom. And that, doesn't matter if it's home or work for that, it tells you that. So I'm gonna click that, and that's where you get in Anoka County, 69,777 are employed in Anoka County but live outside Anoka County. 53,017 live and work in Anoka County. But the majority of workers 132,000, live in Anoka County but work elsewhere. So one could assume that they're, commuting down into Minneapolis, St. Paul, or other neighboring counties or cities to work. So Anoka, you could argue, is largely a commuter county. But let's say we want to know a little bit about where they're going. We can do that as well. So I go back to change settings, and I want to know for where workers are working, and I want to see kind of their destination. I can do that here. That's another profile option. And I want to know what places they're going to, so what cities. I select place there, and I hit go. Ooh, and you know what? I did it the opposite way. So I did it on the, this is where workers live who work in Anoka County. I actually want those that live in Anoka, where do they work? So that's what this one will show. As I mentioned, it gets confusing sometimes. That was an example of it in action. Okay, so for folks that live in Anoka County, most of them work in Minneapolis, like the large, not most of them, but the largest number. St. Paul, number 2, so that kind of assumption looks like it lines up. And you can see the darker here reflects the cities that those workers are commuting to, or where their employer is located. And you could do this for counties or for states, kind of what you're most interested in. And then the last one that is interesting is distance and direction. So how far away are their employers located? And again, this may have less and less relevance as remote work becomes more prevalent. But you could see here that of the people living in Anoka, or workers living in Anoka County, 38% of them are located within 10 miles of their workplace. About half are 10 to 24 miles of their workplace. And only 3.8% have their employer located 50 miles or more away. So some pretty interesting information here that can be super useful for economic developers or folks looking at kind of location-based workforce development grants. Okay. I mentioned some info on grants, so I'm going to show that. One example that we have is the Youth at Work Competitive Grant. So it's just a grant that looks at helping disengaged youth. So you have to identify different communities and needs, employer needs, that include careers in high growth and high demand occupations. So those are things that very specifically right away LMI can answer, especially as it relates to high growth and high demand occupations. We have that data available via our website and our data tools. The community needs and the youth needs are a bit maybe a little bit harder to identify, and there's like several ways to identify it. But census data that are available via that profile that I showed earlier do have a lot of the information that I would argue would help to answer those questions in this example application. So for example, if you need to address youth needs, that enrollment or employment status tables of the American Community Survey could be great kind of starting points. So you could say X number of youth between 16 and 24 of color are not working or not enrolled in some school. So that's kind of number of disengaged youth. The poverty rate for individuals under 18 is X compared to the poverty rate for the overall population. So you can kind of show these disparities as needs for these programs. And then employer needs, we have our job vacancy survey, which can show just right up front, where the demand is for certain occupations and industries in your area or in your region. Career pathways is kind of the next part of like, how are you going to do this? How will your organization use labor market information to an industry data to inform youth about careers in high growth and high demand occupations? The information are available. So you could easily say, Deed has these data, and these are the specific data that we're going to share with youth in the program or employers in the program. And we have career pathway data that can show the different credentials and how folks that get those credentials perform after they get them. So we have graduate employment outcomes, which is another tool that details how much people are making, graduates are making by program, by credential throughout the state, whether they're working, et cetera, full-time, part-time. So there's a lot of data to really back up and support different arguments for need in both grants such as this, Youth at Work, but in many others. It just is knowing where to start looking, which hopefully you have a little bit of from this training. The Department of Labor Building Pathways to Infrastructure Jobs Grant is another example, and there's endless number of grants here, but some possible sources to answer the questions here are, again, the ACS, that QWI we talked about, OEWS, and QCW. So we covered all those today, and they really help you to, one, describe the population to be served. So that's American Community Survey right off the top. Underrepresented and underserved communities, you can show different disparities in terms of income, poverty, educational attainment via ACS pretty quickly. You can also show different outcomes in terms of employment from quarterly workforce indicators by race, age, sex, etc. You can identify the sectors that the project will address based off of labor market information. That is pretty simple using QCEW data. So just showing the different industries, how they've been faring over time, but also what they're projected to do using employment projections, which are also available via our website. The current state of career pathways also limited, connected to the employment outcome data, so employment outlook data, so different projections, how many jobs are going to be added or lost over the next 10 years, over the next year. You can also see how, again, using graduate employment outcomes, different pathways are faring relative to others. So some may have a lot of graduates and high median wages relative to all graduates as a whole. Some may have declining graduates, declining wages, or stagnant wages. So that might indicate differing career pathway outcomes. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of make your case. And I guess the main point that I'm making is that the data are out there to support your applications, to support your work in economic development and grant writing. It's just knowing where to start. And hopefully the 4-5 tools that we discussed today can kind of give you that platform to build off of. We have a ton of other resources that are available, of course. Occupations in demand, current employment statistics, job vacancy survey are just a few of those. I mentioned a couple others. We have those publications and our regional and county data profiles, which for our data are kind of that same version of that census place profile. It gives you a lot of information in one place so that even if it's not there, you kind of know the next question to ask, like, hey, I am interested in this median household income that's listed here, but do you have it available for X population or X geography that isn't necessarily available in this one version that you shared with me? So it's kind of like a menu of data and information to help start the conversation, or maybe it gets you exactly what you need. Um, Either way is great. If not, us regional analysts are always here to help. And I guess I'll open it up again to any questions to see if anybody has any further questions. And again, I'll share them out after the presentation in the days that follow. So any questions from you, you last 5 that hung around to the bitter end? That's all right. Well, thank you so much for attending today. Here is our contact information. So you kind of know the face and name for the regional analysts in your area. If you are interested in further training, we do have more opportunities, and we'll have more opportunities kind of throughout the year with different focuses. And so stay tuned. The trainings that are available are on our data tool page at the top. So if you want to kind of this just whet your appetite a little bit, but you want to learn more, there will be more opportunities. And we have in-person opportunities as well, in-person trainings if that's more your style. Or if you want shorter or longer ones, we try to offer an array for folks. How often, a question Kevin asked, how often are the county and regional profiles updated? It's generally once or twice a year, just given that we have data that are updated on different schedules all the time. We kind of just say, okay, every summer we update the profiles. So I think they just are being updated right now with the most recent QCW data. So they're pretty fresh. But as soon as we publish them, it's another data source got updated, via the census or whatnot, and then then it's a reason to come back to us and be like, hey, can I get the updated version of this table? And we're happy to do that. So once a year for sure, Kevin, is the answer. Yeah. All right. You're very welcome. If there aren't any other questions, thank you again for spending your time with me, and hope to see you out there and meet you in person at some point. And don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone here with your questions. Again, big or small, that is our role, is to help. So thank you very much, and have a great day.